Welcome back, Left Reckoners. I'm Matt Leck. Without David Griscom today, David is south of the border, and you'll be hearing more about that jaunt soon, as soon as he's back on the other side of our border security. But until then, we have a returning guest, Tiare Gatti Mora. She's a Spanish-Italian journalist. She's been on this show before. Welcome back, Tiare.
Hi, Matt. Thank you so much for having me on again. Big fan of the show, as you know already.
I'm a big fan of yours as well as David is. And, we're going to talk about some, use you as our sort of European correspondent. But before we do that, we need to talk about America because we address an American audience. And one of the things I'm curious about is how the world is reacting to Trump being back in office. Broad question, how is the world reacting to that?
Well, especially in terms of Europe, I think there is a clear case of Trump derangement syndrome once again, and a lot of posturing as if they are opposed to kind of his figure, definitely always more focused on whether he's, politically incorrect or sort of not, into Ukraine enough. But then the reality is Europe is still kind of pretty much at the mercy of the US in a way, definitely still pretty submissive. So it's a lot of posturing, I would say.
Yeah, I have this tweet I'm looking here from Bruno Mackais, and basically he's tweeted a lot here, so I can't find it. But he basically said, "Look, the Europe is acting as if, really the two poles, maybe I'm wrong, are China and America." And I'm curious how that's being navigated here, because we're having this whole discussion in America about how do we get our our productive economy back up. And it's entirely divorced from the idea that we're being kind of left behind by China. That's easier for America to do because we don't want to confront that reality. Our entire, propaganda is toward the idea that could never happen, that on quality, China could never sort of catch up to us. But I feel like it might be different for Europeans because you're on the same landmass. Why? Is there like a faithfulness? Are they focusing on Trump's manners because the actual alliance is something they're not ready to question yet?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think they're ready to question the alliance. I think a lot of European leaders, definitely on the far right, definitely on the center right, posture kind of about being more into the US and like closer to the US, but the reality is they do continue to, have sort of less loud alliances with China. And I'm not an expert in that realm, but I will say that is the case. And there is like an economic like reapproachment with China, which actually was sort of initiated by, Silvio Berlusconi, who was a figure who didn't really care much about the politically correct. And so, that should come as no surprise to anyone. But yeah, basically, parties like, for example, Fratelli d'Italia, the populist right-wing Italian governing party, are sort of, publicly pro-American, but then behind the scenes, they do pursue ties with China, definitely.
Yeah, and I'll just put this tweet up because I mentioned it here. This is a Bruno Mackais. Starting to look at Europe today. If China sells us ultra-cheap solar panels, effectively subsidizing our energy transition, that's a threat. That's the threat of autocracy. If the U.S. uses coercion and blackmail to sink our economies, that's working together. And I'm curious, the phrase "not aligned" got big during the Cold War. What does a non-aligned Europe look like?
Yeah, so there's been quite a bit of debate about that. As you know, Matt, I collaborate with DiEM25. That's not to say that I agree on everything with DiEM25. There's certainly a lot of points that I do agree on. And for instance, there is a defense of a non-aligned, although non-neutral Europe. And we've had some debates on the platform with some guests who have differing opinions. And so in terms of being dependent on the US and making it sound like, oh, that's non-authoritarian. But then, if you do have some sort of, connection to Russia or China, then it's, just a no-go, as if the US foreign policy is any better. To be honest, I don't think it is. Not that I think any of these foreign policies are good. I'm just saying they're all pretty bad. And so we had a guest, author Thomas Fazzi, on the Meta25 channel. He writes for Unheard, and he's an author. And he was basically making pretty interesting points about how, the US wants a stronger hold on the European continent through a number of avenues. So, for instance, the military, through reinforcements of NATO, the economy via the manufacturing of sort of industrial crisis that would allow the US to basically cannibalize chunks of the European economy via investment funds like BlackRock, and also through greater energetic dependence from the US, getting to the point where we're at. He basically told us that the energy Europe no longer buys from Russia. It is now buying mainly from the United States in the form of liquefied gas, and actually at a much higher cost and a greater environmental impact, which is pretty ironic given they, talk a lot about, being environmentally friendly and all that. Turns out, ultimately, we're still pretty much dependent on the US and becoming even more so at the cost of, a bad impact on our economy and on the environment, actually, too.
Yeah, the military side of what's going on in Europe seems really distressing because, you've had Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which, led to maybe more understandable, but ultimately maybe not wise still, desire to build up Europe's military. And you also have the Europe support, not to the extent of America's support of Israel and what's going on in Gaza and the West Bank, but fairly still pretty strident support. And then you have Trump's saying, hey, you need to spend more on the anti-war Trump, which his way of being anti-war is to tell everyone else they need to be more pro-war. How is the left, particularly in Europe, responding to what looks like a military-industrial buildup?
Yeah, so I want to clarify something that Ursula von der Leyen, not a fan, did and has been up to in the last few months. Basically, in March of this year, she unveiled a plan to rearm Europe. And she basically announced that we are in an era of rearmament. And basically, this plan includes defense investment loans to member states, use of the EU budget to direct more funds towards defense-related investments, and deploying private capital. Basically, it's a lot of warmongering, and a lot of, deprioritizing what was already pretty much lacking in the EU, which is, measures that would counter austerity, which has been pretty much the regular state of things, unfortunately. And so, this was received by obviously a lot of people on the left as a very bad idea. Needless to say, I think a lot of us have been speaking up against this. DiEM25 on this particular point has been, obviously against the rearmament. All of the most sort of anti-war organizations obviously see no place for this. There have been like other arguments that for example, at the end we've heard, like we had a Professor Jorge Tamames on, and we interviewed him on the topic, and he was telling us sort of another point of view that some other parts of the left have had, which is a little more like, let's say, less a priori against military investment of any kind. So basically his point was that it makes more sense to build European deterrent capabilities, sort of against Russia specifically, since we're on it, on a European Union level, rather than for each European state on its own. And sort of, it's supposed to be a route that would make the EU more independent from the US and less reliant on the Trump administration, theoretically, basically to have a European rearmament effort rather than a more NATO-based one, or one, that is more connected to other regions. And then basically his point was that Europe is becoming disaligned because Trump snubbed them, basically, in general. And the question is, what will they do after Trump is gone? And on that last point, I definitely agree with him in the sense that I think Europe has been showing a little more opposition, even though to me it seems like it's mostly posturing, but it is pretty much connected to the Trump administration, not to a real will to be sort of independent and non-aligned. And I would say personally, again, this is it's not an area that I'm particularly knowledgeable on, but I will say I don't think it's a good idea to have any sort of centralized European project, especially not when it involves more military expense. I'm going to be honest with you, I have no faith in the EU. I have faith in Europe. The European Union, I am progressively realizing, is no use, if not counterproductive, to be quite honest. And, I fundamentally think it would be a very bad idea to have any sort of European-based army, or even, more defensive investment in general. And in general, I trust European nations to, in the future, do more for their national interests. It doesn't seem like the EU is doing that, is pursuing the interests of Europe as a region. It seems like it's more like pursuing the interests of the European capitalist class as a class. So, I don't feel particularly interested as a socialist in supporting that. Plus, I was reading on Jacobin, basically this analysis of, why Donald Trump has turned on Europe. I can send you the link if you want. But basically, they were kind of making the point that Europe, via investing in more military rearmament, this will basically just ultimately become a further cash transfer to Washington, given what they were sort of laying out in that article. And, it seems like a very fair point. Like, it's apparently it looks like it's something more European based, but actually it's not, to me, it's not the way to become non-aligned or to become independent. There are so many actual issues that aren't rearmament. Like, that's literally the one thing we should be least excited about. And so I don't know. I personally don't see the point in doing that.
Yeah, I mean, the timing on it seems pretty crazy to anyone who remembers the last, 15, 20 years, which is that brutal austerity, especially following the 2008 financial crisis, where particularly Germany said no deficit spending. we're not going to do anything like this for climate or, to keep people in their homes or to keep their jobs. And then all of a sudden, because the military industrial complex says, oh, we can start doing that here, it's all of a sudden, oh, Germany is all of a sudden, willing to spend money and deficit spend. It seems very, from a societal level, it seems like not the greatest, sequence.
Yeah, that is exactly the case, and that is the point that our guest Fatsi was making the other day. It's basically ridiculous and pretty obvious to anyone checking this and keeping track of the history that, yeah, countries like Germany, who've been so, pro austerity, suddenly, actually now it's fine. Yeah, because it's not for the working class, it's for the interest of, a capitalist class that has certain, business deals to get into. It's got nothing to do with the well-being of Europeans at all.
Yeah. And I've heard that same thing, the to sell it a little bit, the idea of getting rid of NATO, I like in a vacuum. I don't think NATO should exist. I think Europe should figure out a way to defend itself without NATO and America basically calling the shots. But the sort of idea that, like I've seen some people say, well, maybe we could just, instead of, like, we're saying that money should be toward bombs or whatever, but really we could spend it on climate change and just say it's military preparedness. Like, I fine, if you do that, great job. But like you said, a lot of this is just going to come back to the United States because we're the big arms dealer in the world. And so it's possible maybe that Europe could spend its way into having, bomb factories of its own. But is that really like the way we want our political economy to be set up, to have redundant bomb factories across different continents? Like, there are actual things that need to be done when it comes to preparedness with climate change, and we're just building up, slaughter machines.
Yeah. Yeah, we could be building nuclear stations, for instance, I think that would be a much better use of any sort of funds.
And how much better would that be for the actual issues you're dealing with, like, say, a belligerent like Russia, right? Like, a huge problem is the energy issue. Where are people at with the Russia-Ukraine war right now? I mean, I imagine that's been pretty difficult, especially difficult to navigate for the left over in Europe, because, Russia did initiate the war. That said, there is, like we mentioned, the longstanding critique of NATO and that sort of stuff, and militarism as a solution to this sort of stuff in general, as opposed to, say, diplomacy. The sense over here is that maybe Zelensky's time is running out, and the West is losing patience with him. Is that the perception you got over there?
Well, in general, I would say there are certain parts of the left that are feeling a bit annoyed at the importance that throughout the war, European leaders have placed on Ukraine, in the sense that things are really not going well in Europe in general. Like, people are struggling pretty much everywhere. I mean, if you look at even, British cities, they look like ghost towns sometimes. Like, it's very grim. Even Germany, which tended to be more stable, now really doesn't look it. Southern Europe is just in this really stagnant position of, just basically lack of jobs. Housing is absolutely ridiculous. And it feels like we are like forever teenagers. And, to have all of that going on and people being completely exasperated, and then you turn around and it's all about saving Ukraine, when there's a genocide happening as basically at the same distance, or roughly, like, geographically speaking, it's kind of right here, especially for us in the South. it just feels, obviously Russia is at fault for starting that war. I think nobody pretty much denies that, even though obviously there's been a role of the West. But I mean, beyond that, like, it's pretty clear that Russia is at fault here. That being said, yeah, like, obviously diplomatic solutions would be preferable. And also, this constant hammering of, just because, I mean, just my opinion, unfortunately, nowadays the left is always looking for the next victim to save. Like, unfortunately, I think this is a big problem we have. And Ukraine just works so well for a certain part of the more centrist left. And so they just basically have been going for it for a very long time and made of it a sort of exceptional situation. And it is a very serious situation. It's just the exceptionality, if you will, that is being given. I think a lot of people see through it, and ultimately they just want their lives to get better first and foremost, which I can totally understand. And so, if now we are spending money on this American, gas, and it just feels like a little absurd to sort of make that the focus when things are going so, like, incredibly bad around here already. And so, yeah, obviously it's a very serious situation, but the exceptional character is being given is just very obvious to a lot of people in Europe.
Yeah, I think, like, especially with Gaza, what's going on in Gaza breaking out, it really shows, I think, to me, why the West wasn't able to rally the world behind Ukraine or to support Ukraine. It's because they know that what we say about protecting civilian life and democracy is actually just State Department propaganda. And that's regardless of, what the actual issue is and which side people want to agree with. So that's enough America stuff. Let's talk about last time you were on the program, we talked about Yolanda Diaz, a leader
Yes.
of Spain's left-wing
Yeah.
Sumar alliance, and Deputy Prime Minister.